My name is Emily. I'm 62 years old. I've been married to Michael for 7 years now. His sister Rachel has always been the center of this family. I'm the one sitting in the corner. It's Christmas morning in Tampa, Florida. Rachel starts handing out gifts like she does every year. To Michael's parents. To all the cousins. Even to Mrs. Henderson next door. "What about Aunt Emily?" asks 5-year-old Timothy. Rachel smiles sweetly. "Some people just don't qualify, sweetheart. 7 years. The same thing every single year." I watch Rachel fuss over 94-year-old Margaret, my mother-in-law, constantly adjusting her blanket, bringing her tea, asking if she needs anything. Margaret always thanks her politely, calls her, "Dear Rachel," accepts her attention gracefully. But when Margaret thinks no one is looking, she squeezes my hand under the table. A gentle pressure that says what words cannot. Later that day, Margaret quietly asked me to drive her somewhere. When we got in the car, she handed me a manila folder. "This is for you, Emily. Keep it safe." None of us knew that this folder would change everything. Before I begin today's story, please subscribe to our channel. Let me know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. And if you hit that like button, I promise good luck will find you today. The dinner rolls were still warm when Emily Carter pressed her fingertips against the kitchen counter. Steam rose from the basket, curling toward the ceiling fan that spun lazy circles above her head. She counted the rolls twice. 12. Enough for the whole family gathering tonight. Emily opened her pill organizer with a soft click. The compartments held her evening medications in neat little rows. Tuesday through Sunday. Each day planned, measured, controlled. She swallowed the pills with lukewarm coffee and told herself she was lucky to have family. Even if it never felt like hers. The drive to George and Marie Carter's house took 15 minutes through Tampa's quiet neighborhoods. Palm trees lined the streets like sentries. Christmas lights blinked on porches, red and gold against the December dusk. Emily sat in the passenger seat while Michael drove, his hands steady on the wheel. He hummed a tune she didn't recognize. "You okay?" Michael asked, glancing at her. Emily smoothed her dress over her knees. "Fine." But fine felt like a word she wore too often. Like clothing that didn't quite fit. George and Marie's living room glowed with warm light from table lamps. The Christmas tree stood in the corner, branches heavy with ornaments that caught the lamplight and threw tiny rainbows on the walls. Cinnamon candles burned on the mantel. The scent hung thick in the air, almost too sweet. Emily found her usual spot on the edge of the sofa. Close enough to belong. Far enough to disappear if needed. Rachel Carter moved through the room like she owned it. She wore a burgundy dress that probably cost more than Emily's monthly grocery budget. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled. Her jewelry caught the light when she turned her head. "Everyone gather around," Rachel called, her voice bright and theatrical. Emily watched Rachel arrange the wrapped presents under the tree. Each gift had a matching bow. The wrapping paper looked expensive thick, with a subtle pattern that probably had a name. Rachel lined up the packages like a showroom display. The family circled the tree. Cousins, spouses, neighbors who had become like family over the years. Even Mrs. Henderson from next door, who helped with Marie's garden. Emily counted 23 people. She knew because she always counted. Rachel picked up the first gift and read the tag with ceremony. "For George, from the kids." George beamed as he unwrapped a watch. The family clapped. Emily clapped too, her hands making soft sounds in her lap. "For Marie, with love." A silk scarf emerged from tissue paper. Marie held it up, and the fabric shimmered like water. Rachel continued down the pile. Each name announced clearly. Each gift received with gratitude. Emily smiled at each reveal. She shifted in her seat when her legs got stiff. She kept her hands folded and waited. The pile grew smaller. "For Mrs. Henderson, because you're family too." The neighbor pressed her hand to her chest, surprised and delighted. Emily felt a flutter of warmth for Rachel's thoughtfulness. The pile was nearly gone. Emily leaned forward slightly. Her name would come soon. It had to. She had been part of this family for 7 years. She brought the dinner rolls every Christmas. She helped with cleanup. She sent birthday cards. Rachel's eyes swept across the room and passed over Emily like she was empty space. Emily felt her throat tighten. She leaned forward anyway, hoping it was a mistake. Hoping Rachel had simply lost track. For Timothy, because big boys deserve big presents. The 5-year-old squealed with joy over a toy truck. Emily's chest felt hollow. Only 3 packages remained under the tree. For Sarah and James, a little something special. 2 packages left. Emily's hands gripped each other in her lap. Her mouth felt dry. She looked at Michael, but he was watching Rachel with careful eyes. And for my sister-in-law Marie, because family takes care of family. 1 package left. Emily stared at the last gift. It sat alone under the tree, wrapped in the same expensive paper as all the others. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Rachel reached for the final package and paused. She looked directly at Emily for the first time all evening. Then she smiled. "Oh my," Rachel said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I must have miscounted." The room went quiet except for the soft Christmas music playing from the kitchen radio. Emily felt every eye in the room turn toward her. Heat climbed up her neck and spread across her face like fever. George cleared his throat. He grabbed a gift from under the tree that was clearly meant for him and pushed it toward Emily. "Here, Em, we can share this one." "Honey," Marie whispered to Rachel. "Maybe you forgot." "I don't forget," Rachel said, her voice sweet as the cinnamon candles. "I just count carefully." Emily wanted to say something. She wanted to ask what she had done wrong. She wanted to explain that she belonged here too. Instead, she heard herself make a small sound in her throat. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked, but the words came out too soft to count as real speaking. Rachel tilted her head like she was considering the question. "Wrong? No, honey. You just don't understand how these things work." Emily caught a detail that made her stomach drop. On the side table, Rachel's day planner lay open. The pages were covered with neat handwriting in different colored pens. Names, sizes, preferences. A complete family gift list. Emily could see her own family's section from where she sat. Michael's name was there in blue ink. Even Mrs. Henderson's name was written in green. Emily's name was nowhere. Rachel noticed Emily looking and flipped the planner closed with a sharp snap. The conversation slowly returned to normal. People examined their gifts again. Children played with toys. The adults talked about holiday plans. Emily sat perfectly still and tried to become invisible. She succeeded. Michael drove her home in silence. The streetlights blurred past the car windows like fallen stars. Emily pressed her fingertips into the steering wheel and stared at the road ahead. "She probably just ran out of room in her budget," Michael said finally. Emily didn't answer. She was thinking about the planner. About the careful, colorful organization of everyone's names except hers. About the way Rachel had smiled when she said she counted carefully. At home, Emily hung up her dress and put on her soft pajamas. She washed her face and brushed her teeth. She did all the normal nighttime things while feeling completely abnormal inside. In bed, she lay on her back and stared at the ceiling fan. Michael's breathing grew deep and regular beside her. The house settled around them with small creaking sounds. Emily closed her eyes and tried to remember if she had ever been important enough to write down in somebody's planner. If she had ever been counted carefully. If she mattered to anyone in ink. She couldn't remember. The last thought before sleep was a question that sat in her chest like a stone. If I'm invisible here, where else am I disappearing? The mail arrived every Tuesday at 11:30. Emily had learned to time her coffee break around the postal truck's rumble down their street. She liked the ritual of sorting letters at the kitchen counter while the heater coughed in the hallway behind her. This Tuesday felt different from the moment she touched the mailbox handle. Emily pulled out the usual stack. Electric bill, grocery store flyers, a magazine for Michael about fishing. Then her fingers found something unexpected: 2 envelopes from Medicare, both addressed to Michael. One was crisp and new. The other looked like it had been opened and carefully resealed. Emily set the fresh envelope aside and examined the opened one. The glue on the flap had been moistened again, but not perfectly. A tiny corner stuck up like a flag. She unfolded the paper inside. The Medicare explanation of benefits form was covered with numbers that made no sense. Charges for a specialist visit in Hillsborough County. Emily had never been to Hillsborough County. Michael had never mentioned going there. The paper felt thin and sharp against her fingertips. Like it could cut if she wasn't careful. "What's that?" Emily jumped. Michael stood in the doorway, his coffee mug steaming in his hand. His eyes fixed on the Medicare paper. I was just sorting the mail, Emily said. There's a charge here I don't understand. Michael crossed the room in 3 quick steps and took the paper from her hands. Not gently, not the way he usually touched things that belonged to her. It's probably just a billing error, he said without looking at the paper. You know how these insurance companies are. He folded the form and slid it into the kitchen drawer where they kept important papers. Emily heard the lock click. Michael had never locked that drawer before. Maybe we should call them, Emily suggested. To clear up the mistake. I'll handle it, Michael said. He kissed her cheek, but it felt like punctuation at the end of a sentence she hadn't finished reading. After Michael left for his morning walk, Emily stared at the locked drawer. The key sat in a small dish beside the coffee maker. She could easily open the drawer and look at the paper again. But something about the way Michael had moved quick, protective, almost guilty made her hands feel heavy. Instead, she called the Medicare phone number from memory. She had called it enough times over the years to know it by heart. The automated system asked her to enter Michael's Medicare number. Then it transferred her to a representative. How can I help you today? The woman's voice was professional and warm. I have a question about a charge on my husband's account, Emily said. There's a specialist visit we don't recognize. Let me pull up the account. Can you verify the last 4 digits of the Social Security number? Emily rattled off the numbers. She had memorized Michael's Social Security number when they got married. She used it for tax forms, insurance paperwork, emergency contact information. I'm sorry, ma'am, but I can't release information about this account to you. Emily felt her stomach tighten. I'm his wife. I understand, but you're not listed as an authorized contact. The account shows only one authorized person besides the member himself. The words hit Emily like cold water. Who is the authorized contact? I can't release that information. You would need to have Mr. Carter call and add you to the account, or you could submit a written request with his signature. Emily hung up the phone and stared at the kitchen counter. 7 years of marriage. 7 years of handling Michael's medical appointments, insurance claims, prescription pickups. She had never been an authorized contact on his Medicare account. Someone else was. That afternoon, Emily drove to the pharmacy to pick up Michael's blood pressure medication. She had been picking up his prescriptions for months. The pharmacist, a young woman with kind eyes, knew Emily by name. That'll be $47, the pharmacist said, sliding the prescription bag across the counter. Emily blinked. 47? It's usually $12. Your plan changed, the pharmacist said, checking her computer screen. The new coverage has a higher copay for this medication. Changed when? The pharmacist clicked through several screens. Looks like the change was processed last month. You might want to call your insurance company to confirm the details. Emily handed over the money, her fingers clumsy with the bills. The prescription bag felt heavier in her hand than it should have. At home, she found Michael reading the newspaper in his recliner. The afternoon light slanted through the living room windows, making dust motes dance in the air. The pharmacy said your insurance plan changed, Emily said, settling into the chair beside him. Michael didn't look up from the sports page. Did it? The copay is 4 times higher now. These companies are always changing things. He turned the page with a sharp snap. I'll look into it later. Emily studied her husband's profile. The way his jaw tensed when he concentrated. The gray stubble he hadn't bothered to shave that morning. The newspaper held high enough to block her view of his eyes. Michael, she said softly. Is everything okay? He lowered the paper then and looked at her directly. His eyes were tired, but not just from the long day. They were tired in a way that made Emily think of secrets carried too long. Everything's fine, Em. You worry too much. But Emily had lived with Michael long enough to know the difference between everything being fine and everything being managed to look fine. Sunday dinner at George and Marie's house felt different after the week of strange paperwork. Emily brought her usual green bean casserole and watched the family gather around the dining room table. The conversation flowed over topics she only half heard. Rachel's real estate sales, George's retirement plans, Marie's book club. Emily was thinking about authorized contacts and locked drawers when she noticed Rachel leaning close to Marie's chair. Mom, you've been getting a lot of mail lately, Rachel said, her voice casual but her eyes alert. Do you need help organizing it? Marie dabbed her lips with her napkin. What kind of mail? Oh, you know. Insurance forms, Medicare statements. Those thick envelopes that are hard to open. Rachel's hands moved as she talked, gesturing toward Marie's purse on the side table. I could help you sort through it. Make sure you're not missing anything important. Emily watched Rachel's eyes follow Marie's purse like a cat watching a bird. There was something hungry in the attention. I manage fine, Marie said, but her voice wavered slightly. Of course you do, Rachel agreed quickly. But sometimes it's easier with two pairs of eyes, you know? Especially with all those scammers targeting seniors these days. Rachel's gaze swept the table and landed on Emily. You have to be so careful about who you trust with personal information. Some people get confused about paperwork, and that's when mistakes happen. The word confused hung in the air like smoke. Emily felt it settle on her skin. I'm not confused, Emily said quietly. Oh, honey, I didn't mean you specifically. Rachel's smile was bright and sharp. I just meant that paperwork can be overwhelming for anyone. Right, Michael? Michael poked at his mashed potatoes and said nothing. After dinner, Emily helped clear the table while the men watched football in the living room. She carried plates to the kitchen and found Rachel already there, loading the dishwasher with efficient movements. I've been meaning to ask, Rachel said without looking up. How are you handling all of Mom Carter's medical appointments? That must be a lot to keep track of. Emily set down the plates carefully. Margaret manages her own appointments. Does she? Rachel's eyebrows lifted in mock surprise. Because I noticed she's been having some memory issues lately. Little things, you know. Repeating stories. Forgetting conversations. Emily had noticed no such things, but she didn't say so. Rachel continued stacking dishes. It's probably time someone stepped in to help. Someone who understands the family's financial situation. Margaret seems sharp to me, Emily said. Of course she does to you, Rachel agreed. But family members see things differently. We notice patterns you might miss. The plural pronoun felt deliberate. We, family members, not Emily. Emily dried her hands on the dish towel and walked back to the dining room. Through the window, she could see Margaret sitting on the back porch, feeding breadcrumbs to the birds that gathered in her garden. Margaret's movements were steady and purposeful. Her eyes followed the birds with clear attention. Emily wondered who else was watching Margaret with attention that wasn't quite as clear. That night, Emily lay in bed and listened to Michael's breathing settle into sleep patterns. The house was quiet except for the occasional creak of settling wood. She thought about authorized contacts and prescription changes and the way Rachel's eyes had followed Marie's purse. She thought about locked drawers and missing Medicare forms. Most of all, she thought about the difference between being confused and being kept in the dark. Emily slipped out of bed and walked to the kitchen in bare feet. The tile floor was cold against her skin. She found the key in the dish beside the coffee maker and unlocked the drawer. The Medicare form was gone. In its place was an empty space shaped like a missing piece of her life. Emily stared at the drawer for a long time, her hands gripping the counter edge. Then she locked the drawer again and put the key back in its dish. She understood now that trust could be stolen quietly, like paper slipping into someone else's pocket. Like authorization given to the wrong hands. Like changes made to plans she had never agreed to change. Emily went back to bed and closed her eyes, but sleep stayed far away. Instead, she lay in the dark and wondered who else was making decisions about her life. While she counted dinner rolls and folded napkins and tried to belong to a family that kept moving her boundaries without telling her where they had gone. The invitation arrived on expensive cardstock with embossed letters. Marie's 80th birthday celebration at the Tampa Bay Country Club. Emily ran her fingertip over the raised printing and felt the weight of formal expectations. It'll be nice, Michael said, adjusting his tie in the bedroom mirror. Marie's been looking forward to this for months. Emily zipped up her navy dress and checked her reflection. The dress was 3 years old, but it was her best. She had paired it with the small pearl earrings Michael had given her for their anniversary. Simple, but appropriate for a country club dinner. The Tampa Bay Country Club sat on manicured grounds overlooking the water. Palm trees lined the circular driveway. Valet attendants in white jackets opened car doors with practiced efficiency. Emily had never been to a place with valet parking. Inside, the dining room glowed with crystal chandeliers and soft carpet that muffled footsteps. Round tables were set with china plates and multiple forks. Fresh flowers stood in tall arrangements that probably cost more than Emily's weekly grocery budget. The family gathered around two large tables near the windows. Emily counted 37 people. Extended family, longtime friends, neighbors who had become like family over the decades. She recognized most faces, though she couldn't match all of them with names. Emily found her place card at the second table. Michael's card was beside hers. She touched his arm lightly and smiled. Being seated together felt like a small kindness. Rachel commanded attention from the head table. She wore a black cocktail dress that emphasized her slim figure. Diamond earrings caught the chandelier light when she turned her head. Her hair was styled in an elegant updo that looked professionally done. "Everyone," Rachel called, tapping her champagne glass with a silver knife. "Before we eat, I have a special presentation for Mom." The room quieted. Silverware stopped clinking against plates. Conversations trailed into silence. Rachel produced a large wicker basket from beneath the head table. "As you all know, family is everything to Mom. So we've put together a little family gift exchange to show our appreciation." Emily felt a familiar flutter in her stomach. Gift exchanges had not gone well for her recently. Rachel reached into the basket and pulled out the first envelope. "These are little tokens of gratitude from each family member," she announced, "for all the love Mom has given us over the years." One by one, Rachel called names and distributed envelopes. Each recipient opened their gift to reveal either cash or gift certificates. The amounts varied, but everyone received something. Children squealed over toy store gift cards. Adults smiled over restaurant certificates. Emily watched the basket grow lighter. She counted the remaining envelopes. Her pulse quickened when she realized there were exactly enough left for the remaining family members. Including her. "For George and his wonderful golf game," Rachel said, handing over an envelope. "Pro Shop credit." George beamed and held up a gift certificate. The family applauded. "For Cousin Linda, because she always knows the best places to shop." Linda opened her envelope to reveal a department store card. More applause. The basket was nearly empty. Emily's name had to be next. She smoothed her napkin over her knees and prepared to smile graciously when called. Rachel reached into the basket and paused. She looked directly at Emily with an expression Emily couldn't read. Then Rachel's mouth curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh my," Rachel said, loud enough for both tables to hear clearly. "I must have miscounted." Emily's chest went hollow. Around the room, conversations died. 37 people turned to look at the woman who had somehow been miscounted. Timothy, Marie's 5-year-old great-grandson, pointed directly at Emily from his booster seat. "Why didn't Aunt Emily get one?" The question hung in the air like incense, thick and impossible to ignore. Rachel tilted her head and looked at Timothy with theatrical concern. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the dining room, "some people don't deserve presents." The words landed like a physical blow. Emily felt her face burn with humiliation. Her hands gripped her napkin until the fabric tore at the edge. Around the room, family members stared at their plates or studied the chandelier or suddenly became very interested in their water glasses. No one looked at Emily. No one spoke. Michael sat beside her like a statue, his face pale but his mouth firmly closed. Rachel leaned closer to Timothy, but her voice remained loud enough for the entire room to hear. "You see, honey, presents are for real family. And some people," she paused, her eyes finding Emily's across the crowded table, "aren't really family, no matter how long they pretend to be." Emily's chair scraped against the floor as she started to stand. Her legs felt unsteady, like she was standing on a boat deck in rough water. "Excuse me," she whispered, but her voice came out smaller than a whisper. "Where are you going?" Rachel asked with mock concern. "We haven't even had dessert yet." Emily couldn't answer. Her throat felt like it had closed completely. She took one step away from the table, then another. "Please don't take it personally," Rachel called after her, her voice following Emily across the dining room like a spotlight. "It's not your fault you're not really one of us." Emily's hip bumped against a chair from another table. The scrape echoed through the room like a gunshot. She mumbled an apology to the startled diners and kept walking toward the exit. Behind her, she heard Rachel's voice continue, sweet and poisonous. Poor thing gets so emotional. I suppose when you don't really belong somewhere, holidays can be difficult. Emily found the ladies' restroom and locked the door behind her. The bathroom was elegant, with marble countertops and soft lighting. She gripped the sink edge and stared at her reflection in the mirror. Her face looked older than it had that morning. The humiliation had settled into lines around her eyes and mouth. Her lipstick was gone, probably from pressing her lips together to keep from crying. Emily turned on the cold water and let it run over her wrists. She had read somewhere that cooling your wrists could help calm your heart rate. She wasn't sure if it was true, but the cold felt good against her burning skin. She stayed in the bathroom for a long time, washing her hands over and over as if she could scrub off the shame. When she finally emerged, the dining room had moved on to coffee service and birthday cake. Emily made her way back to her table, avoiding eye contact with anyone. She slipped into her chair beside Michael, who was cutting his cake into careful, geometric pieces. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Emily nodded because speaking felt impossible. Across the room, Rachel was holding court at the head table, telling a story that made the surrounding family members laugh. Her hands moved gracefully as she spoke. Her smile was radiant. Emily watched Rachel's purse sitting on the table beside her plate. It was expensive leather, the kind that held its shape even when empty. As Rachel gestured, Emily caught a glimpse of something protruding from the purse's open top. A folder, manila-colored, with something written on the tab. Emily squinted across the dim dining room and made out 2 words, estate planning. Rachel noticed Emily looking and snapped her purse closed with one quick motion. But not before Emily saw a 3rd word on the folder tab, Carter. Rachel's eyes met Emily's across the room. For just a moment, the sweet mask slipped, and Emily saw something calculating and cold underneath. Then Rachel smiled again and returned to her story, her voice light and musical above the sounds of coffee cups and dessert spoons. Emily sat very still in her chair and understood something that made her hands go numb. The cruelty wasn't random. It wasn't even about jealousy or petty family drama. It was training. Rachel was teaching the entire family how to treat Emily. She was demonstrating that Emily could be excluded, humiliated, and ignored without consequence. She was showing 37 people that Emily didn't matter enough to defend. And it was working. Emily looked around the room at faces she had known for 7 years. Cousin Linda was laughing at something George had said. Timothy was drawing on his napkin with a crayon. Marie was accepting birthday wishes from a friend. Life was going on as if nothing had happened. As if Emily's humiliation was just part of the evening's entertainment, already forgotten like the dinner courses that had been cleared away. Emily realized that Rachel hadn't miscounted anything. She had counted very carefully. She had counted Emily out. The question was why, and Emily was beginning to suspect that the estate planning folder in Rachel's purse held the answer. Thursday morning arrived gray and humid. Emily drove to Margaret Carter's house through streets lined with Spanish moss and flowering bougainvillea. The radio played soft jazz, but Emily barely heard it. Her mind was still in the country club dining room, replaying Rachel's words like a record stuck on the same groove. Margaret's bungalow sat on a quiet street where retired neighbors tended small gardens and walked small dogs. The house was painted pale yellow with white trim. Flower boxes lined the front windows, filled with petunias that Margaret watered each morning at 7 o'clock. Emily parked in the driveway and walked to the front door. She knocked gently, knowing Margaret sometimes napped in the afternoon. "Coming," Margaret's voice called from inside. The door opened to reveal Margaret in a floral house dress and sensible shoes. At 94, she moved slowly but steadily. Her gray hair was pinned back in a neat bun. Her eyes were sharp and blue behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Emily, dear," Margaret smiled. "What a lovely surprise. I hope I'm not bothering you," Emily said. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by." Margaret's living room smelled like lemon furniture polish and the vanilla candles she lit every afternoon. Family photos covered the mantelpiece and end tables. 40 years of grandchildren, great-grandchildren, holiday gatherings, and milestone celebrations. Emily settled into the floral armchair that Margaret always offered to guests. Margaret disappeared into the kitchen and returned with 2 glasses of sweet tea, ice clinking against the sides. How was Marie's birthday dinner? Margaret asked, settling into her own chair with careful movements. Emily sipped her tea and chose her words carefully. It was lovely. Marie seemed happy. And Rachel? Did she behave herself? The question surprised Emily. Margaret's tone carried a note she couldn't identify. Not quite disapproval, but something close to it. Rachel organized everything beautifully, Emily said diplomatically. Margaret nodded slowly. Rachel always was good at organizing. Even as a little girl, she had to have everything just so. Her toys lined up perfectly. Her dolls dressed exactly right. Margaret paused, stirring her tea though it didn't need stirring. The problem with organizing people is that sometimes you forget they're not dolls. Emily didn't know how to respond to that. Margaret set down her tea glass and looked directly at Emily. Has Rachel been helping you with your mail lately? The question landed like a trap door opening under Emily's feet. My mail? Insurance forms, Medicare statements. That sort of thing. Margaret's voice was casual, but her eyes were intent. She's been very helpful with mine. Emily's pulse quickened. Helpful how? Oh, picking up forms from the doctor's office. Making sure I don't miss any deadlines. Margaret's fingers worried the hem of her house dress. She says older people sometimes get confused about paperwork. The word confused, again. Emily was beginning to hate that word. Do you feel confused about your paperwork? Emily asked gently. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Outside the window, a mockingbird ran through its repertoire of borrowed songs. Finally, Margaret spoke. Emily, dear, when you've lived as long as I have, you learn to tell the difference between being confused and being managed. That evening, Emily sat at her kitchen table and sorted through Michael's desk drawers while he watched television in the living room. She told herself she was looking for the missing Medicare form, but she wasn't sure that was entirely true. In the bottom drawer, behind a stack of old fishing magazines, her fingers found an envelope that made her stomach drop. The return address read, First National Mortgage Services. The envelope was addressed to Margaret Carter. It had been opened and refolded several times, the creases worn soft from handling. Emily pulled out the letter with trembling hands. Dear Mrs. Carter, the letter began. This notice serves as final warning regarding your mortgage account number 47,291,835. Your account is currently 120 days past due in the amount of $3,247.18. If payment is not received within 10 business days, foreclosure proceedings will begin. Emily read the letter 3 times before the words settled into meaning. Margaret's house, the yellow bungalow with the flower boxes and vanilla candles, was in foreclosure. But Margaret had owned that house for 30 years. She had paid off the mortgage when Emily first met her. Margaret had been proud of owning her home free and clear. Emily studied the letter more carefully. At the bottom, in small print, she found a reference number for a refinancing loan, taken out 8 months earlier. The loan amount was $180,000. Someone had convinced Margaret to borrow against her paid-off house. Emily's hands shook as she folded the letter. She was about to put it back in the drawer when she heard footsteps in the hallway. What are you doing? Michael's voice was sharp. Emily turned in her chair, the letter still in her hands. Michael stood in the doorway, his face pale in the overhead light. I found this, Emily said, holding up the letter. Margaret's house is in foreclosure. Did you know? Michael crossed the room in 2 quick steps and took the letter from her hands. You shouldn't be going through my things. Your things? This is about Margaret. It's complicated, Michael said, not meeting her eyes. How is it complicated? Someone took out a loan against her house. Who would do that? Michael sat down heavily in the chair across from her. He looked older than his 65 years, worn down by something he was carrying alone. Rachel is helping Margaret manage her finances, he said finally. By putting her house in foreclosure? By making sure she has enough money for medical expenses. The loan was supposed to be temporary. Emily stared at her husband. Margaret didn't tell me she was having money problems. She didn't want to worry anyone. Her medical bills have been piling up. The Medicare gaps are getting bigger every year. Michael rubbed his forehead like it ached. Rachel offered to help. By risking Margaret's home? By giving her options. Emily felt pieces clicking together in her mind like a puzzle she didn't want to solve. Who signed the loan papers? Michael was quiet for too long. Michael, who signed for the loan? Rachel has power of attorney, he said quietly. For medical and financial decisions. The words hit Emily like cold water. Since when? Since Margaret started having memory issues. What memory issues? She seems fine to me. Michael's jaw tightened. You don't see her every day. You don't see the confusion, the repeated conversations. She needed someone to step in. Emily thought about her conversation with Margaret that afternoon. About the sharp blue eyes and the careful distinction between being confused and being managed. I want to talk to Margaret about this, Emily said. You can't. Michael's voice was firm. Rachel says it would stress her out too much. She's fragile. Emily felt something cold settle in her chest. So Margaret doesn't know her house is in foreclosure? She knows there are financial issues. Rachel is handling the details. Emily stood up from her chair, her legs unsteady. I need some air. She walked to the back door and stepped onto the small patio behind their house. The night was warm and humid. Crickets chirped in the overgrown hedge that bordered their neighbor's yard. Emily gripped the patio railing and tried to make sense of what she had learned. Margaret's house in foreclosure. Rachel with power of attorney. Medical bills that had somehow materialized after 94 years of Margaret managing her own affairs. Emily thought about the estate planning folder in Rachel's purse. About the Medicare forms that had disappeared from her own kitchen drawer. About the way Rachel had emphasized that some people don't deserve presents because they're not really family. A terrible picture was forming in Emily's mind. Emily drove to Margaret's house the next morning with the foreclosure letter in her purse. Her heart pounded as she turned into the familiar driveway. But Rachel's silver BMW was already parked there. Through Margaret's front window, Emily could see two figures sitting at the kitchen table. Rachel's blonde head was bent close to Margaret's gray one. Papers were spread between them. Rachel was pointing to something on the page, her finger moving in decisive gestures. Emily sat in her car and watched. She couldn't hear their conversation, but she could see Margaret's face. The old woman looked smaller than usual, shrunk in her chair. She nodded repeatedly as Rachel spoke. Rachel reached across the table and patted Margaret's hand. It looked like comfort, but Emily noticed that Rachel didn't let go. She kept hold of Margaret's hand while she continued talking. Emily thought about power of attorney papers and Medicare authorizations and the way trust could be stolen quietly, one signature at a time. She started her car and drove home. She couldn't confront Rachel with Margaret there. But she was beginning to understand that Margaret might not be as protected as everyone claimed. That night, Emily lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. She thought about the difference between helping someone and helping yourself to someone. She thought about the yellow bungalow with the flower boxes, and whether Margaret would still be living there at Christmas. Most of all, she thought about the look in Rachel's eyes at the country club dinner. The calculating coldness that had flickered there for just a moment. Emily had always believed that families protect each other. But now she was learning that some families are the thing you need protection from. And she was beginning to suspect that Margaret's wasn't the only life being reorganized without permission. Emily remembered the first December after she married Michael. Snow had been falling outside their old apartment window, thick flakes that turned the world quiet and white. She had been stirring soup on the stove when the phone rang. Emily, dear, it's Margaret. Would you like to come for tea? Emily had hesitated. She barely knew Margaret then. Michael's mother seemed kind but formal, the sort of woman who used china cups for everyday occasions and folded her napkins into perfect triangles. I don't want to impose, Emily had said. Nonsense. I have a new blend I'd like to share. That afternoon, Emily had sat in Margaret's living room, balancing a delicate teacup on her knees while Margaret poured from a flowered pot. The tea was Earl Grey with lavender honey. It tasted like comfort. Michael tells me you're a nurse, Margaret had said. A home health aide, Emily corrected. I help seniors with daily tasks. Margaret had smiled. That's noble work. Taking care of people when they're vulnerable requires a special kind of heart. Emily had felt tears rise unexpectedly. It was the first time anyone in Michael's family had called her work noble. Some people think it's just a job, Emily had said softly. Some people don't understand the difference between caring for someone and caring about someone. Margaret had refilled Emily's cup without being asked. You care about people. I can tell. That memory floated back to Emily now as she sat in her car outside Margaret's house, watching Rachel's BMW disappear around the corner. The contrast felt sharp, the warmth of that first tea service against the cold calculation of whatever had just happened inside the yellow bungalow. Emily knocked on Margaret's front door and waited. When it opened, Margaret looked smaller than she had 3 days before. Her house dress hung looser on her frame. Her eyes seemed tired behind the wire-rimmed glasses. "Emily," Margaret said, and her voice carried relief. "Please, come in." The living room felt different. The family photos were still there, but something about the arrangement seemed off. Emily couldn't identify what had changed until she realized the photos of Margaret's late husband had been moved to less prominent positions. Margaret settled into her usual chair with movements that seemed careful and deliberate. Emily noticed that Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her dress over her knees. "Would you like some tea?" Margaret asked. "That would be nice." But Margaret didn't get up to make tea. She sat in her chair and stared at her hands. "Actually," Margaret said quietly, "I was hoping you might drive me somewhere. If it wouldn't be too much trouble." Emily felt her pulse quicken. "Of course. Where would you like to go?" "To see my attorney, Mr. Davidson on Dale Mabry Highway." Margaret's voice was steady, but Emily caught an undertone she couldn't identify. "I need to take care of some routine paperwork." Emily knew the drive to Dale Mabry would take 20 minutes through Tampa traffic. She also knew that nothing about this request felt routine. "When would you like to go?" Emily asked. "Now, if possible." Quietly. Margaret's eyes met Emily's directly. "I'd rather not mention it to the family. You know how they worry." Emily helped Margaret gather her purse and a light sweater. As they walked to the car, Margaret moved with purpose. The frailty Emily had noticed in the living room seemed to fall away once they were outside. In the car, Margaret stared out at the palm trees and strip malls sliding past the windows. Emily kept the radio turned low and let the silence sit between them until Margaret was ready to break it. "Rachel visits me every Tuesday," Margaret said finally. Emily's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "That's nice. It's good to have family close by. She asks a lot of questions about my mail. My doctor visits. My bank statements." Margaret's voice was calm, but Emily heard something underneath it. "She says older people sometimes miss important details." Emily thought about the foreclosure letter hidden in Michael's desk drawer. About the Medicare authorization she had never given. About the way Rachel's questions always seemed to orbit around paperwork and access. "Do you miss important details?" Emily asked gently. Margaret was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was firm. "Emily, when you've lived as long as I have, you learn to tell the difference between missing details and having details taken from you." They drove in silence after that. Emily felt pieces of understanding settle into place like stones dropping into still water. At the law office, Margaret walked with steady steps across the parking lot. Inside, the receptionist greeted her by name. "Mrs. Carter, Mr. Davidson is ready for you." Emily started to take a seat in the waiting area, but Margaret turned to her. "Would you mind coming with me? I'd appreciate the company." Mr. Davidson's office smelled like leather and coffee. Law books lined the walls. A large window overlooked the busy street outside. The attorney was a man in his 60s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "I have the documents ready as you requested." Margaret sat in the chair across from his desk. Emily took the chair beside her, feeling like an intruder in a conversation she didn't understand. Mr. Davidson spread several papers across his desk. "These forms will revoke the existing power of attorney and establish a new arrangement. Are you certain this is what you want to do?" Margaret's voice was steady. "Completely certain." Emily watched Margaret sign the papers with careful, deliberate strokes. Each signature was clear and firm. There was nothing confused or uncertain about the way Margaret wrote her name. "We'll also need a current competency assessment, Mr. Davidson said, just to ensure there are no questions later." He produced another document. Emily saw the words, "Mental Competency Affidavit," at the top. A doctor's signature was already at the bottom, along with yesterday's date. "Dr. Reeves examined me yesterday," Margaret explained, as if she could read Emily's thoughts. "Clean bill of health, mentally and physically." Margaret signed the competency form as clearly as she had signed the others. Mr. Davidson witnessed each signature and added his own name to the papers. "That should take care of everything," he said. "The new power of attorney will be effective immediately. The previous arrangement is now null and void." Margaret gathered her purse and stood. "Thank you, Mr. Davidson. This gives me great peace of mind." In the car, Emily started the engine but didn't put the car in drive. "Margaret, what just happened in there?" Margaret was quiet for a moment, her hands folded in her lap. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that made Emily pay attention. "Rachel convinced everyone that I was confused. That I needed help managing my affairs." Margaret's fingers worked the strap of her purse. "The power of attorney gave her access to my bank accounts, my Medicare information, my mortgage." Emily felt her stomach drop. "Your mortgage? The house has been paid off for 15 years, Emily. But Rachel convinced me to take out a new loan. For medical expenses," she said. "For my own security." Margaret's voice stayed level, but Emily heard anger underneath. The money went into an account Rachel controlled. Emily thought about the foreclosure notice. About the $180,000 loan that had appeared from nowhere. "She's been borrowing against the house," Emily said. "Among other things." Margaret looked out the passenger window at the parking lot. "The Medicare changes, the insurance adjustments. Rachel has been making decisions about my life without my knowledge. All perfectly legal, since I had given her power of attorney." Emily felt pieces clicking together. "The family thinks you have memory problems. Rachel has been very convincing about my mental decline." Margaret's mouth curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "She's even convinced my own son that I'm not capable of managing my own affairs." Emily stared at the steering wheel. "Why didn't you say anything before?" "Who would I tell? Michael believes Rachel is helping me. The rest of the family thinks I'm a confused old woman who should be grateful for the assistance." Margaret turned to look at Emily directly. "You were the only person who visited me without asking about my bank statements or my medication schedule." Emily felt tears rise in her throat. "I just wanted to spend time with you." "I know," Margaret said softly. "That's why I trust you." Margaret reached into her purse and pulled out a manila folder. She handed it to Emily. "This is for you. Copies of everything, the loan documents Rachel signed, the Medicare authorizations, the bank transfers. All of it." Emily opened the folder and saw a paper trail that would make a prosecutor weep with joy. Every transaction was documented. Every signature was photographed. Every authorization was copied and dated. "How did you get all this?" "When you've been married to an accountant for 47 years, you learn to keep good records." Margaret's smile was sharp. "I may be old, Emily, but I'm not stupid." Emily drove Margaret home in silence, her mind spinning with implications. As they pulled into Margaret's driveway, Emily noticed Rachel's BMW parked across the street. "She's watching," Margaret said calmly. Emily looked in her rearview mirror and saw Rachel sitting in her car, phone pressed to her ear. Rachel's eyes were fixed on Margaret's house. "What happens now?" Emily asked. Margaret gathered her purse and the sweater she hadn't needed. "Now we see how long it takes for Rachel to realize that her access to my accounts has been revoked." Margaret stepped out of the car, then leaned down to the passenger window. "Emily, dear, you might want to check your own paperwork. Medicare authorizations, bank accounts, insurance policies. Make sure no one has been making changes without your permission." Emily watched Margaret walk to her front door with steady steps. No confusion, no frailty, no need for assistance. Just a 94-year-old woman taking back control of her own life. In her rearview mirror, Emily saw Rachel start her car and drive away. That night, Emily sat at her kitchen table with the manila folder spread open before her. The evidence was overwhelming. Rachel hadn't just been helping Margaret, she had been systematically draining her resources while convincing everyone that Margaret was too confused to notice. Emily thought about the difference between caring for someone and caring about someone. About the way kindness could be counterfeited and concern could be performed. Most of all, she thought about Margaret's warning to check her own paperwork. Emily was beginning to understand that she hadn't been excluded from Rachel's Christmas gift exchange because she wasn't really family. She had been excluded because she was next. Margaret Carter passed away on a Tuesday morning in February. Emily found out when Michael answered his phone in the kitchen, his coffee cup freezing halfway to his lips. "When?" Michael asked into the phone. His voice was thick with shock. Emily watched her husband's face change as he listened. The color drained from his cheeks. His hand gripped the phone tighter. "We'll be right there," Michael said, and hung up. "Margaret?" Emily asked softly. Michael nodded. Peacefully, in her sleep. "Marie found her when she came by this morning." Emily felt grief hit her chest like a physical weight. Margaret had been the one person in Michael's family who had truly seen her. The one who had poured tea from flowered china and called her work noble. But underneath the grief, Emily felt something else. Fear. The funeral was held on Friday at Palms Memorial Chapel. The sanctuary was filled with flowers and quiet conversations. Emily wore her navy dress and sat beside Michael in the third row. She watched the family gather, their faces appropriately solemn. Rachel arrived 15 minutes before the service, holding Michael's arm like she was supporting him through his grief. She wore a black dress that looked expensive and perfectly appropriate. Her makeup was flawless except for the carefully applied touch of redness around her eyes. During the service, Emily listened to stories about Margaret's life. Her 47-year marriage to Harold. Her dedication to her church. Her weekly volunteer work at the food bank until she was 92. Each story painted a picture of a woman who had lived with purpose and clarity until the very end. After the burial, the family gathered at George and Marie's house for the traditional meal. Emily helped serve plates of casseroles and sandwiches while conversations swirled around her. People shared memories of Margaret's kindness, her sharp wit, her determination. No one mentioned confusion or memory problems. No one talked about Margaret needing help with her affairs. Emily noticed Rachel moving through the crowd with efficient sympathy, asking practical questions about Margaret's belongings and paperwork. Her grief seemed organized, purposeful. "The will reading is scheduled for Monday," Rachel announced to the immediate family. "Mr. Davidson's office, 10 o'clock. Emily felt her stomach tighten. She had never been included in family legal matters before. She wasn't sure if she would be invited to this one. "Of course Emily will be there," Michael said, as if reading her thoughts. She was closer to Mom than anyone. Rachel's smile flickered for just a moment. "Of course," she agreed. Family should all be together. Monday morning arrived cold and gray. Emily dressed carefully in her best black skirt and white blouse. She and Michael drove to Mr. Davidson's law office in silence, each lost in their own thoughts about what the day would bring. The waiting room was already crowded when they arrived. George and Marie sat together on the small sofa. Rachel occupied the chair nearest to Mr. Davidson's door, a leather notebook open on her lap. She was writing notes with a gold pen, her handwriting neat and controlled. Other family members filed in gradually. Cousins, nephews, longtime family friends who had been included in Margaret's will. Emily counted 14 people in total. At exactly 10 o'clock, Mr. Davidson opened his door and invited everyone into his office. Extra chairs had been arranged in a semicircle facing his desk. Emily found herself in the back row, behind Rachel and the immediate family members. Mr. Davidson was the same kind-eyed attorney who had witnessed Margaret's signature on the power of attorney revocation. He spread several documents across his desk and adjusted his reading glasses. "Before we begin," he said, "I want to note that Mrs. Carter updated her will 6 weeks before her passing. All documents are properly witnessed and legally binding." Rachel leaned forward in her chair. Emily could see her pen poised over the notebook, ready to record account numbers and asset details. Mr. Davidson cleared his throat and began reading. "To my dear church family at First Presbyterian, I leave my collection of Bibles and religious books." Murmurs of appreciation from the church friends in attendance. "To the Tampa Bay Food Bank, where I volunteered for 15 years, I leave $25,000 for their emergency assistance fund." More murmurs. Emily felt proud of Margaret's generosity. Mr. Davidson continued through smaller bequests. Jewelry to longtime friends. Personal items to neighbors who had been kind. A grandfather clock to a cousin in Georgia. Then he reached the larger items. "To my son George and his wife Marie, I leave the family vacation property in North Carolina, along with all furnishings and contents." George reached for Marie's hand. Emily saw tears in Marie's eyes. To my son Michael, I leave $50,000 from my investment accounts and my late husband's workshop tools. Michael's breath caught. Emily knew he had been worried about retirement funds. Rachel's pen moved across her notebook, calculating totals. Emily could see the anticipation in her posture as Mr. Davidson reached the final portion of the will. The remainder of my estate, Mr. Davidson read, his voice clear and steady, including my primary residence, my investment portfolio, my savings accounts, and all personal effects not otherwise designated, I leave to Emily Carter. The silence that followed was so complete that Emily could hear the air conditioning humming in the walls. Rachel's pen stopped moving. The notebook slipped from her lap and hit the floor with a soft thud. I'm sorry, Rachel said, her voice sharp. Could you repeat that? Mr. Davidson looked at her over his reading glasses. The remainder of Margaret Carter's estate goes to Emily Carter. The total value is approximately $460,000, plus the house and contents. Emily felt the room spin around her. She gripped the arms of her chair and tried to understand what she had just heard. Rachel exploded out of her chair like she had been launched. That's impossible, she shouted. There's been a mistake. She lunged toward Mr. Davidson's desk, reaching for the will documents. Let me see that. She was confused. She didn't know what she was signing. Mr. Davidson pulled the papers back calmly. Mrs. Coleman, please return to your seat. I'm contesting this, Rachel declared, her voice rising. Undue influence. Elder abuse. That woman convinced a sick old lady to change her will. Emily felt every eye in the room turn toward her. Heat climbed up her neck and spread across her face. She's not even real family, Rachel continued, pointing at Emily with a trembling finger. She manipulated a vulnerable woman for money. This is fraud. 2 security officers appeared in the doorway. Mr. Davidson must have pressed a silent alarm. Ma'am, you need to calm down, one officer said firmly. Rachel whirled toward the security guards. Don't you understand? This is theft. She stole my inheritance. The officers moved closer. Ma'am, we're going to ask you to step outside. Rachel's composure shattered completely. She grabbed for the will papers again, knocking over Mr. Davidson's coffee cup. Coffee spread across the desk, soaking into legal documents. She's a con artist, Rachel screamed as the officers took her arms. She targeted a sick old woman. How is that legal? As they escorted Rachel from the office, Emily heard her heel scrape against the carpet, leaving a dark mark like a bruise. The door closed behind them, and the room fell silent again. Michael stared at Emily with an expression she couldn't read. He said quietly. Did you know? Emily shook her head. Her hands were shaking so hard she couldn't hold her purse strap. Mr. Davidson dabbed coffee from his papers with tissues. Mrs. Carter, he said to Emily, your mother-in-law anticipated this reaction. She asked me to prepare additional documentation. He opened a manila folder and spread new papers across his desk. Medical records showing Mrs. Carter's perfect mental competency at the time of her will revision. Character references from her doctor, her pastor, and 3 longtime friends. And this. Mr. Davidson produced a sealed envelope. Video testimony, recorded 2 days after the will was changed. Mrs. Carter wanted to explain her reasoning in her own words. Emily stared at the envelope. Margaret had planned for this moment. She had known Rachel would challenge the will, and she had prepared her defense in advance. There's also this, Mr. Davidson continued, producing another folder. Documentation of financial irregularities Mrs. Carter discovered in her accounts. Unauthorized transfers, questionable loan approvals, insurance changes she never authorized. Emily thought about the manila folder Margaret had given her in the car. About the carefully documented evidence of Rachel's manipulation. George cleared his throat from the front row. Are you saying Mom knew about financial problems? I'm saying Mrs. Carter was fully aware of attempts to exploit her resources. She took steps to protect herself and to ensure her estate went to someone she trusted. Emily felt tears rising in her throat. Not tears of joy about the inheritance, but tears of grief for a woman who had spent her last months fighting to protect what she had worked a lifetime to build. Mr. Davidson handed Emily a key. The house keys. Mrs. Carter wanted you to have them immediately. Emily stared at the small silver key in her palm. It felt warm from Mr. Davidson's hand. She also wanted me to tell you something specific, Mr. Davidson said. She said you were the only person who visited her without asking about her money or her medication. The only person who saw her as a person instead of an asset to be managed. Emily understood then why Rachel had excluded her from Christmas gifts and family celebrations. It hadn't been petty cruelty. It had been strategic isolation. Rachel had been preparing the family to see Emily as an outsider. Someone whose exclusion would seem natural when Margaret died and left everything to real family members. But Margaret had been preparing too. And Margaret had been keeping better records. The letter arrived on Wednesday, delivered by certified mail with Emily's signature required. The return address read, Coleman and Associates, Family Law. Emily's hands trembled as she tore open the thick envelope. Notice of will contest, the bold letters announced across the top of the legal document. Rachel was challenging Margaret's will on grounds of undue influence, mental incapacity, and fraud. Emily sank into her kitchen chair and read the accusations. According to Rachel's attorney, Emily had systematically manipulated a vulnerable elderly woman and exploited cognitive decline for personal financial gain. The language was harsh and clinical, designed to make Emily sound like a professional predator. Michael read the letter over her shoulder, his breathing heavy behind her ear. They're asking for a full investigation, Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. Bank records, medical records, witness interviews. We'll fight it, Michael said, but Emily heard uncertainty in his voice. Emily called Mr. Davidson that afternoon. His secretary scheduled an emergency meeting for the next morning. In his office, Mr. Davidson spread Rachel's legal filing across his desk like he was dissecting it. His expression was calm, almost amused. This is exactly what Mrs. Carter expected, he said. She prepared for this challenge very thoroughly. He opened a thick folder Emily had never seen before. Inside were dozens of documents, photographs, and recordings. Medical records from 3 different doctors, all confirming Mrs. Carter's mental competency right up until her death. Mr. Davidson laid out the papers one by one. Character witness statements from her pastor, her neighbors, her longtime friends. Emily saw names she recognized. Mrs. Henderson from next door, the pharmacist Margaret had used for 20 years. The volunteer coordinator from the food bank. But this is the key evidence, Mr. Davidson said, producing a small digital recorder. Mrs. Carter made this recording 2 weeks after she changed her will. She wanted to explain her reasoning in her own words. Mr. Davidson pressed play. Margaret's voice filled the office, clear and strong. My name is Margaret Elizabeth Carter, and I am recording this on February 3, 2024, in the presence of my attorney, James Davidson. I am 94 years old, and I am of sound mind and body. Emily closed her eyes and listened to Margaret speak from beyond the grave. I have discovered that my daughter-in-law Rachel has been making unauthorized changes to my Medicare accounts, my insurance policies, and my banking arrangements. She convinced me to sign a power of attorney by claiming I was becoming confused and needed help with my affairs. Margaret's voice continued, steady and precise. Rachel used this power of attorney to take out a loan against my house without my knowledge. She has been transferring money from my accounts to accounts she controls. When I questioned these activities, she told my family that I was having memory problems and couldn't be trusted with financial decisions. Emily opened her eyes and found Mr. Davidson watching her. There's more, he said. Margaret's recorded voice continued. Rachel has also been systematically excluding my daughter-in-law Emily from family events and conversations. She refers to Emily as not really family, and has convinced others to treat Emily as an outsider. I believe this is to prevent Emily from noticing the financial irregularities or questioning Rachel's control over my affairs. Emily felt tears rise in her throat. Margaret had seen it all. She had understood the isolation tactics and the financial manipulation. Emily Carter is the only person who has visited me regularly without asking about my money, my medications, or my legal documents. She visits because she cares about me as a person. She has never asked me for anything, never suggested financial changes, never pressured me about my estate planning. Margaret's voice grew stronger. That is why I am leaving the majority of my estate to Emily. Not because she influenced me, but because she was the only person who didn't try to influence me. She treated me like a human being instead of an asset to be managed." The recording ended. The office was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic outside. Mr. Davidson closed the folder. Mrs. Carter also documented every unauthorized transaction Rachel made. Bank transfers, insurance changes, the mortgage refinancing. She kept copies of everything. How did she know to do that? Emily asked. She suspected something was wrong months ago. She hired a private investigator to trace the financial irregularities. Mr. Davidson smiled grimly. Rachel wasn't as careful as she thought she was. Emily thought about Rachel's confidence at the will reading. About the leather notebook and the gold pen, ready to record account numbers and asset details. Rachel had never imagined that Margaret was recording too. Mr. Davidson filed a response to Rachel's contest the next week. Along with Margaret's recorded testimony, he submitted bank records showing unauthorized transfers, Medicare statements documenting changes Margaret never approved, and sworn affidavits from 3 doctors confirming Margaret's mental competency. The evidence was overwhelming. Rachel's attorney withdrew the will contest 2 weeks later. In a brief letter, he stated that, "New information has come to light that makes pursuing this matter inadvisable." But Emily's relief was short-lived. That same week, she received a call from a Medicare fraud investigator. "Mrs. Carter, we're looking into irregularities on your husband's Medicare account. It appears someone has been making unauthorized changes and accessing benefits inappropriately." Emily's stomach dropped. What kind of changes? Plan modifications, prescription adjustments, specialist authorizations. All done electronically using stolen personal information. The investigator's voice was professional but serious. "We believe this may be part of a larger scheme targeting elderly individuals." Emily thought about the Medicare form that had disappeared from her kitchen drawer. About the prescription copay that had mysteriously increased. About the authorized contact she had never authorized. "We'd like to interview you about your family member Rachel Coleman. Our records show she's been named as an authorized contact on several Medicare accounts without proper documentation." Emily agreed to meet with the investigator. When she hung up the phone, she understood that Margaret's case wasn't isolated. Rachel had been running a systematic operation, targeting elderly family members and their spouses. She had been harvesting personal information, making unauthorized account changes, and siphoning resources through a network of financial manipulations. Emily was just one victim among many. The investigation moved quickly after that. Federal agents interviewed Emily, Michael, and several other family members. They discovered that Rachel had been accessing Medicare accounts for 12 different relatives over a 3-year period. The bank records Mr. Davidson had uncovered led investigators to a complex web of unauthorized transfers and fraudulent loan applications. Rachel had been using her real estate license to process fake property transactions, and her family connections to gain access to sensitive financial information. George and Marie came to Emily's house on a Thursday evening in March. They sat at her kitchen table with coffee cups they barely touched and apologized for 7 years of willful blindness. "We knew Rachel could be difficult," Marie said, her voice small. "But we never imagined she was stealing from Mom." George couldn't meet Emily's eyes. "We should have stood up for you. At Christmas, at the birthday dinner. We knew it wasn't right." Emily listened to their apologies without feeling triumphant. The hurt was too deep and had gone on too long for simple sorry to fix. "Rachel was convincing," Emily said finally. "She made it seem like love. Like protection. She made us all complicit," Marie said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "We watched her exclude you and told ourselves it wasn't our business." Emily thought about the difference between keeping peace and keeping secrets. About the way families can become accomplices to cruelty by choosing comfort over courage. Federal charges were filed against Rachel in April. Mail fraud, wire fraud, identity theft, and elder financial abuse. The prosecution used Margaret's recordings and documentation as key evidence. Rachel pled guilty to avoid a longer trial. She was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution to her victims. Emily attended the sentencing hearing. She watched Rachel stand before the judge in an orange jumpsuit, her perfect hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Rachel looked smaller without her expensive clothes and carefully applied makeup. When given a chance to speak, Rachel turned toward the gallery where her victims sat. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely audible. "I told myself I was helping, but I know that's not true. I was stealing. I hurt people who trusted me." Emily studied Rachel's face for signs of manipulation, for the calculated performance she had learned to expect. But Rachel looked genuinely broken, hollowed out by the weight of her actions. "I can't undo what I did," Rachel continued. "But I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right." Emily didn't know if she believed the remorse was real. But she found she didn't care anymore. Rachel's feelings were no longer her responsibility. After the hearing, Emily drove to Margaret's house, her house now, and sat in the garden where Margaret used to feed the birds. The yellow bungalow looked the same as it always had. Flower boxes in the windows, petunias blooming in cheerful colors. But everything was different. Emily had learned that justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about truth being acknowledged, victims being heard, and systems being changed to prevent future harm. Margaret's voice had spoken from the grave and demanded accountability. Her careful documentation had protected not just Emily, but 12 other family members who might never have known they were being victimized. Emily touched the flowered teacup that sat on the garden table beside her chair. Margaret had left specific instructions that Emily should use the good china every day, not just for special occasions. "Life is too short for everyday dishes," Margaret's note had said. "Use the beautiful things while you can." Emily sipped tea from the delicate cup and watched the birds gather around the feeder Margaret had filled every morning for 20 years. For the first time in months, she felt safe. The justice system had worked. The truth had emerged. The manipulation had been exposed and punished. But most importantly, Emily had learned that she deserved protection. She deserved truth. She deserved to be treated like family, not like a problem to be managed or an obstacle to be removed. Margaret had seen that worth in Emily when Emily couldn't see it in herself. And now Emily was beginning to believe it too. 6 months after Rachel's sentencing, Emily woke up in Margaret's bedroom, her bedroom now to sunlight streaming through lace curtains. The room smelled like the vanilla candles she had learned to love and the fresh coffee brewing in the kitchen. She had moved into the yellow bungalow in May, after spending weeks sorting through Margaret's belongings and deciding what to keep, what to donate, and what to treasure. The house felt different than it had when she visited as a guest. It felt like home. Emily's morning routine had changed. She walked to the kitchen in her slippers and poured coffee from the pot that clicked on automatically at 6:30. She opened the front door and brought in the newspaper. Then sat at Margaret's small dining table to read the headlines while birds chattered outside the window. At 7 o'clock, she walked to the end of her driveway and waved to Mrs. Henderson next door, who was already watering her garden. They had become friends during the difficult months of legal proceedings and federal investigations. "Morning, Emily," Mrs. Henderson called. "Coffee's ready if you want some company." Emily often took her up on that offer. They would sit on Mrs. Henderson's screened porch and talk about neighborhood news, gardening tips, and the weather. Normal conversations about normal life. Emily had learned to appreciate normal. By 8 o'clock, Emily was dressed and ready for her volunteer work at the Tampa Bay Senior Center. She had started there in April, using skills from her years as a home health aide to help seniors navigate Medicare paperwork and insurance questions. The work felt meaningful in ways her old job hadn't. She wasn't just helping people with daily tasks anymore. She was protecting them from the kind of exploitation she had experienced herself. Mrs. Carter, the center director, had said during her interview, "You have a unique understanding of how financial predators target elderly victims. Your experience could help a lot of people." Emily had never thought of her suffering as useful before. But she was learning that pain could be transformed into purpose if you were willing to share your story. On Tuesday mornings, Emily led a workshop called Protecting Your Paperwork. She taught seniors how to recognize signs of financial manipulation, how to verify Medicare changes, and how to document suspicious activities. The workshop was always full. Apparently, Rachel's tactics weren't unique. "Remember," Emily told her classes, "if someone tries to isolate you from family or friends, that's a red flag. If someone pressures you to sign documents quickly, that's a red flag. And if someone tells you that you're confused or can't handle your own affairs, trust your instincts instead of their words. She kept Margaret's story anonymous in her presentations, but she used the details to help people recognize similar patterns in their own lives. Several workshop participants had discovered unauthorized changes to their accounts after Emily's classes. Emily had become an accidental advocate for elder financial protection. She spoke at community groups, assisted with law enforcement training, and consulted with adult protective services on complex cases. The work was volunteer, but it filled her days with purpose she had never felt before. At home, Emily had made small changes that felt significant. She moved Margaret's husband's photos back to their prominent places on the mantel. She planted new flowers in the window boxes, choosing colors Margaret would have loved. She hung her own artwork watercolors she had painted during art classes at the senior center beside Margaret's family photographs. The house was becoming a blend of Margaret's history and Emily's future. Emily had also made peace with Margaret's inheritance. She sold some of the investment stocks and used the money to establish a fund at the Senior Center for Financial Counseling Services. She kept Margaret's jewelry, but she had one piece redesigned. Margaret's favorite brooch, a delicate silver bird with tiny pearl accents, had been transformed into a simple necklace that Emily wore every day. It sat against her collarbone like a talisman, a reminder of the woman who had seen her worth when everyone else looked past her. Michael visited twice a week, bringing groceries and staying for dinner. Their marriage had survived the crisis, but it looked different now. Emily no longer automatically deferred to his judgment or apologized for taking up space. She had learned the difference between keeping peace and keeping quiet. "You seem stronger," Michael observed one evening as they washed dishes together. "More sure of yourself." "I feel more like myself," Emily agreed. "I think I lost track of who that was for a while." Michael dried a plate with careful attention. "I should have defended you. At Christmas, at the birthday dinner. I knew Rachel was being cruel, but I didn't want to cause family drama." Emily had heard this apology before, and she had accepted it. But forgiveness was a process, not a moment. "Family drama was already happening," she said gently. "I was just the only one experiencing it." Michael nodded. They had talked through this many times, but some conversations needed repetition before they settled into understanding. In August, Rachel sent a letter from federal prison. Emily almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity won. The letter was handwritten on plain white paper. Rachel's normally perfect penmanship looked shaky, uncertain. "Dear Emily," it began. "I know I have no right to contact you, and I understand if you don't want to read this. I just wanted you to know that I've been thinking about what I did to you and to Margaret. And I'm trying to understand how I became the kind of person who could treat family that way." The letter continued for 2 pages. Rachel wrote about therapy sessions in prison, about confronting the entitlement and jealousy that had driven her actions. She admitted to targeting Emily specifically because she was afraid Emily would notice the financial irregularities. "You paid attention to Margaret in ways the rest of us didn't," Rachel wrote. "You saw her as a person, not just a grandmother or a source of inheritance. I was jealous of that relationship, and I tried to destroy it by convincing everyone that you were an outsider." Rachel ended the letter with a request Emily hadn't expected. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, because I don't deserve it. But I'm asking if you would be willing to meet with me when I'm released. I want to make amends in person, not just on paper." Emily folded the letter and put it in a drawer. She wasn't ready to respond, but she was glad Rachel had written it. The apology felt genuine in ways Rachel's courtroom statement hadn't. Emily had learned that healing didn't require forgiveness, but it was sometimes helped by acknowledgement. September brought the first family gathering Emily had attended since Margaret's funeral. George and Marie's anniversary celebration, held in their backyard under string lights and a canopy of oak trees. Emily arrived with a casserole and uncertain expectations. She hadn't been to a family event in almost a year. But something had changed in the family dynamic. People approached her directly instead of politely avoiding eye contact. They asked about her volunteer work and her new house. They included her in conversations about holiday plans and family news. Timothy, now 6 years old and with a better understanding of family relationships, ran up to Emily as soon as she arrived. Aunt Emily, he said, grabbing her hand. Mommy said you help people who get tricked by mean people. Is that true? Emily knelt down to his level. I try to teach people how to protect themselves. That's like being a superhero, Timothy declared with the certainty that only 6-year-olds possess. Emily laughed. I suppose it is a little like that. At dinner, Marie stood up to make a toast. She raised her glass and looked directly at Emily. To family, Marie said. Not just the family we're born into, but the family we choose to love and protect. She paused, her voice growing stronger. And to the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Emily felt tears rise in her throat. Not tears of sadness, but tears of recognition. She was being seen. She was being included. She was being valued. For the first time in years, a family gathering felt like a place where she belonged. As the evening wound down, Emily helped clear dishes and wrap leftover food. George approached her as she was folding chairs. Emily, he said quietly. I wanted you to know that we've all talked about what happened. How we failed you and Mom. He paused, struggling with words. We want to do better. We want to be better family to you. Emily studied his face in the soft light from the string lights. She saw genuine remorse, genuine commitment to change. I'd like that, she said simply. Driving home through Tampa's quiet streets, Emily thought about the difference between being invited somewhere and being welcome somewhere. About the difference between being included and being valued. She pulled into her driveway and sat in the car for a moment, looking at the yellow bungalow with its flower boxes and front porch light. Margaret's house had become her sanctuary, her foundation, her new beginning. Inside, Emily made herself a cup of tea using Margaret's good china. She had learned to use the beautiful things every day, just as Margaret's note had instructed. She sat in Margaret's favorite chair, her favorite chair now, and opened a book she had been reading about eldercare advocacy. Tomorrow she would present a proposal to the county commissioners about expanding senior protection services. Next week she would testify at a legislative hearing about strengthening financial abuse penalties. Emily had found her voice and her purpose in the wreckage of her family's betrayal. She had learned that survival could transform into service, that pain could become protection for others. Most importantly, she had learned that she mattered. Not because of what she could do for others, not because of what she could give or provide, but because she was a human being worthy of respect and love. Margaret had seen that worth when Emily couldn't see it herself. Now Emily spent her days helping other people see their own worth, their own right to safety and dignity. Life doesn't end just because it breaks once. What falls apart can be the very place where we learn to stand again. If this story gave even a small moment of strength to someone out there, then everything I went through means something today. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe, and share a piece of your own story in the comments below. Your words might become the seed of the next chapter we create together. Thank you for spending